Whose land is this? Urban land acknowledgements versus real action. This is a poster called Turtle Island World by David Loblaw. As a group, we decided to base our research off of the personal reflection and experience of Isatou. Isatou lived in Seattle for 5 months and now lives in Ontario. In both places, she often heard land acknowledgements, but doing this project made her realize how hollow those words can feel when there's no real action behind them. Land acknowledgements should be more than a speech before a meeting. They should be accompanied by action, justice, and respect for Indigenous peoples. Let's begin by looking at what a land acknowledgement is. A land acknowledgement is a statement founded in knowledge, learning, and honor. It recognizes that we are located on Indigenous land and addresses the specific territories of the land. It moves with intent to honor the original inhabitants and their relationship within the land. Here is an example of a land acknowledgement and the land acknowledgement used by George Brown College. George Brown College is located on the traditional territory of the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation and other Indigenous peoples who have lived here over time. We are grateful to share this land as treaty people who learn, work, and live in the community with each other. Why do land acknowledgements matter? When done with care and learning, they bring attention to the colonial histories and land and to whom the land is traditional to. They show respect for Indigenous peoples, culture, and land. They're a small step towards reconciliation, but only if followed by action. Actions such as partnerships, resource allocation, land back initiatives, support of Indigenous-led initiatives, and economic development. Here's an example of a disingenuous and problematic land acknowledgement, a land acknowledgement that follows a script rather than genuine care or learning. Let's start with our first case study, the case study of Seattle, which is a Duwamish territory. Seattle sits on the traditional unceded land of the Duwamish tribe. Although they were first people of the area, the U.S. government still does not officially recognize their tribe. In response, the Duwamish launched the Real Rent Duwamish initiative. They ask non-Indigenous residents to pay voluntary rent to help support their sovereignty and cultural work. This campaign reminds us that acknowledging land is only meaningful when followed by real support and action. As the Duwamish say, we are still here. Let's move on to our second case study, Ontario First Nations. In Ontario, we also hear land acknowledgements regularly, in schools, at events, and in government meetings. But beyond those words, many First Nations communities still deal with serious challenges. Some have lived with boil water adversaries for decades. Overcrowded housing and limited control over their services are common. Historical agreements like the Toronto Purchase were framed as land sales, but Indigenous people saw them as sharing agreements. In 2010, the government finally admitted these lands were never properly ceded, settling the case with a $145 million payment. These issues show why words must be matched with justice and action. What's missing? Land acknowledgements are important, but they are often not enough on their own. We hear them a lot now in schools, public events, and institutions, but they can feel performative. The CBC article points out that they often turn into a script, without any real connection to the Indigenous communities. Words alone cannot mean much without action. That includes legal recognition of Indigenous land rights, proper funding, and support for urban Indigenous housing, healthcare, and education. Truth and reconciliation should not just be a report. If we are going to acknowledge the land, we also need to take responsibility for the history and how it was taken and what is still happening today. Without real action, these words lose all their meaning. What real action looks like. Now I want to shift into what is missing into what real action can actually look like. Land acknowledgements should be the start of the conversation, not the end. Real reconciliation means creating space for Indigenous voices and placing them at the center. That can include supporting Indigenous-run housing projects or community programs that help people reconnect with land and culture. It also means pushing governments to take real steps, like returning land and providing long-term funding. On a more personal level, it is also about listening to Indigenous stories, respecting their lived experience, and learning from them. It is not about saying the right words once. It's about showing up consistently and taking responsibility. We are asking you to do more than just say the words. Think about it. Who lived on this land before you? Are you helping Indigenous people with real action, or just saying you support them? Here in Toronto, we live on land that belonged to Indigenous nations long before this city existed. The Anishinaabe, Haudenosaunee, Wendat, and Mississaugas of the Credit. This land wasn't given, it was taken. So let's not stop just acknowledging that. Let's learn more, let's listen, let's take action. Supporting Indigenous communities means showing up, speaking up, and doing the work.